Hi, I'm Patrick Cobb with AARP South Carolina. We're pleased to be a sponsor of the Charleston Post and Courier's Pints and Politics series. AARP is a nonprofit organization, so we don't endorse candidates. For more information, go to aarp.org/SC.
Hello, welcome to another virtual Pints and Politics. I'm Autumn Phillips, managing editor of the Post and Courier. Tonight we're going to be talking about District 2, the race for the U.S. House. We'll talk to Adair for Boroughs and to Joe Wilson. Here's how tonight will go since we have two candidates. We'll start with Adair Ford Boroughs behind me. It'll be a 45-minute conversation. Then we'll take a 10-minute break in which I'll talk to Andy Shane, our Columbia Bureau Chief, about our election coverage. And then Joe Wilson will join us for another 45 minutes. Before we get started, I want to take a minute to thank AARP of South Carolina, our sponsor. They have generously sponsored the Pints and Politics for all of election 2020. Now I'll turn it over to our moderators. Here I have political editor Skylar Croft, who's been covering politics in South Carolina for 30 years. And here I have political reporter Jamie Lovegrove, who is here in our Columbia Bureau. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Autumn. Thanks for being here, Adair. You are new to politics. You are running against a guy who is quite well known in the district, has been around in politics for a very long time. So why don't we start off just by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got here and why you decided to run.
Yeah, so I'm from the district. I grew up in a small town in Barnwell County called Williston. My dad made cabinets. My mom was a teacher. And I grew up in a double-wide trailer there. I have a twin brother who served in the military. And I've been a South Carolina public school teacher. I've been a trial attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice. I've worked for the federal courts here in South Carolina. And most recently, I've been running a nonprofit that a friend of mine and I started to provide affordable, reduced rate legal services for working class people. So that's kind of my background. I'm a mom of two, a wife, and for me, this run is about getting some work done here in the 2nd District. It's about doing very specific, achievable goals. It's not about me being a congresswoman for decades on end. I'm doing a term limits pledge. It's really about achieving some specific things that I want to see for my hometown and for my community here.
Well, running for Congress, walking off the street with no political experience whatsoever you're as long a shot as someone being in high school saying they're going to be in the NFL. Why didn't you start off at local government, county council? Even the state house would be a more traditional path. I mean, you're really going for a very big brass ring. Why?
Because I'm not going for the ring. I'm not going for a political career. I'm not trying to climb some ladder. This is about doing specific things. I want rural broadband across my district from my hometown where I grew up, where people still don't have the internet. The best way to do that is through the USDA and the FCC. Those are federal agencies. That means I need a federal position. I want to work on water infrastructure issues throughout Lexington County. We are not prepared for the next hurricane. We are not prepared for the next disaster because we have drainage issues. That's stuff that can't be done at the local level because the tax base isn't there. We need our federal leaders to help make that stuff happen. And so I have these specific goals, and I'm in a congressional district where we don't have someone taking leadership on these local issues, the federal level, being an advocate with our federal agencies, which I know, and that's what I want to do. I'm not trying some new career path here. I want to achieve these very specific goals. And, you know, we have a lot of women in Congress, frankly, who were first-time candidates. I bet a lot of people said to them, you know, you can't do this. But you look at my record in life, you look at what I've achieved and where I've come from. Tell me one more time what I can't do. We're going to get this done.
So one of the big pieces of news in the district recently has been this agreement that was struck between Attorney General Alan Wilson and federal government to remove 9.5 metric tons of plutonium from the Savannah River site. The state will get paid $600 million for it to happen, but the federal government will get an extra 16 years to do it. Attorney General Wilson and his father, Congressman Joe Wilson, praised that deal and said that it was the best that South Carolina could do. Another Republican statewide elected official, Governor Henry McMaster, criticized the deal, said that it was way too long, and criticized the fact that there will be $75 million in fees for the lawyers who helped work on the deal. Do you agree with Governor McMaster, or do you agree with Congressman Wilson?
Look, I'm not overly thrilled. We're extending the 16 to 20 years, frankly. And it's not a new deal. The government had already promised this, and Savannah Riverside has a history of broken promises from the federal government, and I think we need to hold them accountable. So am I thrilled about the extra 16 to 20 years? No, I'm not. Without compensation for it. No, I'm not. But at this point, we need someone with a vision for SRS forward. And this is a problem we've had long-term with the Savannah River site, is we don't have a long-term vision on sustainability and mission. For me, I think that revolves around the National Lab, which is an asset not only to our district and our state, but to the country. And what I want to see is a national lab with a new mission around cybersecurity. You know, we have so much happening and with private firms there. There's a real synergy and a real opportunity. And this isn't an idea just off the top of the head. We have a feasibility study on having the Savannah River National Lab be a focus for cybersecurity. That's a long-term sustainable mission where our men and women in the 2nd District are doing things that matter for this country. When we don't have that type of vision from our leaderships, what we get are failed projects like Box. And we keep getting failed projects that are never going to make it because we are reacting and not leading with vision on it.
All right, this is our AARP question that they're our sponsors. Americans pay the highest prescription drug prices in the world. If elected, how will you cut prescription drug prices for all Americans?
Absolutely. This is one of my foundational issues. And first of all, we need someone in office who's not taken $450,000 from big pharmaceutical companies and from drug insurance companies. Joe Wilson has, and in return, they got $28 billion in tax cuts, and we got higher drug prices. The first thing we need to do is to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. In 2003, Joe Wilson was the deciding vote in favor of big drug companies where they were not allowed, Medicare was not allowed to negotiate prices. We are in a capitalist economy. What happens when you don't get to negotiate prices? They skyrocket, and they have. And he was deciding vote there. He voted against his constituents here and with Big Pharma there. We need someone in office willing to reverse that decision so we have competition and can negotiate those prices and get them back down to reasonable levels.
This is something that's evolving now. The House is poised to vote on marijuana decriminalization by removing it from the Controlled Substance Act. States would then be free to pass their own laws on marijuana. If you were in the House at this time, would you vote to support it?
Yeah, so marijuana, I think first we need to be talking about it from a medical standpoint. We are behind the game on that. I think it's a real asset, especially to like our veterans. And I hear from veterans every day that wish they had medical marijuana as an option. I think it would do a lot to prevent opioid addiction if medical marijuana was an option. And so we need to be supporting that and getting there, right? And, you know, simple possession, that's not where our law enforcement resources need to be. We have much more important things for our community where they should be focused.
But on the House bill, would you support the House bill? It imposes a 5% tax on marijuana sales and establish a process to expunge certain marijuana-related crimes on your record. Is that something you would support?
Right. So I'm not sure about every provision in the bill. I do support decriminalization of simple possession of marijuana.
But not across the board.
Right.
One of the things you've criticized Congressman Wilson for is the fact that he has only passed he's only sponsored one bill that became law in all his time in office to rename a post office. You know, that's certainly a low number, but any member of Congress will tell you that it is very, very hard to pass legislation through Congress. I think the average number of years that most bills are languishing before they become law is 7 years. And that's even for, you know, the most effective members of Congress. Of course, there's some that move a little faster, but you know, you really have to prioritize on what you're going to do. So what would be your first priority piece of legislation you'd want to propose, and what would you do to be able to build the support to move it through the legislative process?
Absolutely. And so in my frustration with our return on investment with Congressman Wilson is not just on legislation, right? We're not getting our federal dollars back here the way we should for things like broadband and infrastructure. So it's not just that. But my priority is prescription drug costs. It is undoing this 2003 law where he was the deciding vote to allow Medicare to negotiate costs. And I think the best way to go about some of these bipartisan things is we can pick out simple things where people agree. There's actually a lot of places where you see overlaps between the two parties, but because we go for this big fish with a bill with 1,000 things in it, we're never going to get agreement. So we need to find those places where we agree and at least move on that so we can have that done for the people.
Is there a particular idea in your mind that you are most eager to address when you get there?
Yeah, it's the drug costs,
Yeah.
hands down. You know, when I was looking at whether I was going to run, this was like December of 2018, I had one of my friends, longtime friends, say to me, you know, Adair, my husband and I have decided we can't have kids until my mom passes because we cannot afford her prescription drug bill and daycare at the same time. And that was very impactful for me at that moment in deciding we needed someone that was going to push that. And I decided at that moment I was going to take no corporate PAC money. I was not going to be beholden to these pharmaceutical companies. And we were going to push for legislation that actually made things, healthcare, affordable for people here in the district.
It's one thing to work with your own party, but it's more difficult to work across party lines. If President Trump is reelected, are there any areas where you think you could work with him based on what you've seen so far as his agenda?
Yeah, I think it's crucial that we work across party lines. That has gotten harder and harder over the years from my perspective. And I think that's a great loss, a loss to the American people. So I'm sure that there are areas where we can work across party lines, regardless of who has control of the Senate or the House or the presidency.
What would be those areas, though? I mean, it's easy enough to say that you want to work with the president, but what specific areas do you support of his that you would get behind, if any?
Yeah, so there's some, like, for instance, I think there's a lot of bipartisan agreement on some basics on issues of safety around guns. He himself was the one that promoted the banning of bump stocks, for instance. And one of the places I think we can agree on issues like that is, you know, turning normal semi-automatic rifles into automatic rifles is an issue. And that's maybe something we shouldn't be doing. And so he's there on that. So, I mean, I'm sure that there are others. There are things I don't agree with him on, but this is where I was saying earlier, if we want to move the ball forward, we need to find those areas, even if they're narrow, where we can agree and push those issues forward.
Well, the president today moved to cut off continued search for minerals offshore Florida, Georgia, even South Carolina. Do you side with the president in that, or do you think that was just kind of a political move 60 days out from the election? It wasn't honest, that he was just trying to garner votes this close to the election?
Honestly, I am not in his head. I can't determine his motives, but it's a good move, and I agree with him on it. And if it's good for South Carolina, I don't care why he's doing it. It's a good move for South Carolina, and I'm with him on it.
You know, you mentioned major legislation, big pieces of legislation have a hard time moving through. There are two in particular that the more progressive members of the Democratic Party have been pushing for over the last few years. One on healthcare is Medicare for all, or a single payer system. There are a few different proposals like it, but it effectively involves the government taking over all health insurance. There could be some supplemental option for private insurance, but for the most part, everyone would be covered automatically by the government. It would cost about $32 trillion, but it would also obviously drastically reduce private healthcare costs. And then the other one is the Green New Deal when it comes to climate change, which would drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But of course, conservatives criticize the impact that it could have on the economy. Do you support either of those two proposals? And if not, why not? If so, why?
Yeah, no. So the Green New Deal is written as not policy or legislation. And I mean, it's a vision document that covers a whole host of things outside of climate change or green energy. So no, not as written. I want policy that is effective at what we're going to do. Regarding healthcare, no. So my number one issue on legislation is the cost of healthcare. It is not affordable. I hear that every day. And so you have to ask the question, why is the healthcare market not working? Something's not working in this market. It's not affordable. And for me, I think a large part of that answer is, for any kind of economy, capitalist economy to work, you have to have competition. That's like a fundamental premise. And we don't in the healthcare market. When you look at things like insurance companies, do people get to go out and choose their health insurance company? No, they get one choice. It is the health insurance company that their employer has. That's their only choice. And you may have to fight with your insurance company month after month after month to get coverage you need for prescription drugs or something else. And you can't go anywhere else. You don't have any other options. They have no reason to provide you good customer service because you got no options. And so one of the things I am a proponent of is a public option that can compete with these private insurance companies. If you like the insurance company you got, great. If you don't, you have another option, because we have to have that choice and we have to have that competition if we want this to get better. And so that's what I support there. I also support protections that we have in place now, like protecting pre-existing conditions, which Congressman Wilson has voted against multiple times. I'm in favor of things like our current provisions, which allow children to stay on their parents' health care plans until they're 26, again, which Congressman Wilson has voted against multiple times. I think those are very important things in this kind of limited healthcare market that we have.
The past few months, we've seen an increasing discussion about police reforms, and we've seen peaceful protests around the country and some breakouts of violence in cities. Do you support defunding the police?
No, I don't. So I believe that elected officials, their primary concern should be the health, well-being, and safety of their community. And that means some things. It means, one, we need to be funding things like resources for mental health. We need mental health professionals that can respond to mental health crises and substance abuse. And so law enforcement can focus their attention on actual dangerous criminal activity. That's where they should be focused. I believe we need body cams on every officer for accountability and also for their protection. I think we need de-escalation training. I think we should have a diverse workforce. When we entrust men and women with a badge and a gun, they should be our best. And they should reflect the community they serve. And that all takes funding. So I'm not in support of taking that funding away.
There are Republicans who can't utter the phrase Black Lives Matter. Do you believe Black Lives Matter?
Yes. Yes. I mean, Black Lives Matter. And I think sometimes the reason people have trouble saying it is because they don't understand the phrase means Black Lives Matter too. Black Lives Matter also. And they do.
Do you think the rioting or what's been calculated so far, has it been productive for the country?
So rioting, no. Protesting, yes. And there's a difference between those two. And most of the protests in our country, over 90% of them have been peaceful. So I do not endorse rioting or violence or property destruction. But protest is our First Amendment, right? Of all of the Bill of Rights, of the 10 individual Bill of Rights our founders listed, the top of the list is the ability to express your views and to say, I have a story. And like, I went to the Martin Luther King March here in Columbia, and what I saw there was a lot of pain, frankly. I saw people saying, I have a story. Will you look at my experiences? And I am afraid for my children. Can you listen to me talk to you about the America I want to see for my children? And when we are having those discussions, even if they're uncomfortable, I think it is incredibly important and productive for the future of our country.
We've got to solicit a number of questions too from our viewers and readers, and one of those focused on the comments reported by the Atlantic recently, quoting the president is saying that soldiers who went to Vietnam were suckers, and military men who were lost in war were losers. Do you side with the reporting of the Atlantic that was backed up by other news sources, or do you side with the president's denials that he didn't say that?
It's not about sides, but I'll tell you this. I have spoken out on this because it is unacceptable to me. It is unacceptable to have a commander-in-chief that is going to degrade our men and women in uniform. Not okay. My brother was a veteran. He served tours. And he made some sacrifices for this country. And there are people that made more sacrifices than him. And it's just not okay. It's not okay to disrespect them in their service to this country. I said that. Wilson has been silent on it. So I encourage you to ask him. I encourage him to actually say, I stand with our men and women in uniform over my party leader, because that's what we need in leadership. We need people willing to stand with the men and women at Fort Jackson, at the VA hospital here in this district, and with the people in this district, and not with their party leaders when it comes to things like this.
So you believe in the reporting is accurate?
Well, there's multiple reportings from multiple sources. It's been verified. This is not a one-off story from a random website.
We're 7 months now or so into this pandemic, at least in the United States. It obviously started a few months earlier in China. How would you assess the response both from South Carolina and the federal government? And if you had been in office at the beginning of this, how would you maybe have treated it differently?
Yeah, I think we missed a huge opportunity with early testing, right? We knew this from prior pandemics. The way that we get control of this early is widespread, massive testing very early on and tracing, and we missed that boat. One of the things that frustrated me with Congressman Wilson's response to this was that he voted against the Families First Act, which provided free coronavirus testing. One of the reasons we couldn't get massive testing is because people were being quoted with four-figure bills for testing in early March when this all started. And so that was a key component to getting moving forward. He voted against. And the other thing was, I don't think our leaders took this seriously enough early on, and he was one of them. We were breaking down these bills, the Families First Act, the CARES Act, telling people what they needed to do to make use of these programs. We were doing it before it appeared on his website anywhere, before he even acknowledged that this pandemic was an issue. And so I think we need leaders, not reactors. And to me, he very much just was on a reactionary path with this. There are things like the PPP program that has been very important for small businesses making ends meet and keeping employees on payroll. And what we're hearing from people across the district is, you know, our help in explaining how you make use of this program, we've had thousands of views of that, very useful. Congressman Wilson's office, not so much. And we have, South Carolina was one of the last to get money into the state from that program. And I think that's a failure of leadership on our national leaders' part. And so this is something where you need really awesome constituent services to help small businesses figure out these new programs like PPP. And you need an advocacy level at the federal level interfacing with these federal agencies that are managing them.
The obviously we passed several months ago now, we passed a relief bill in the CARES Act. It's been a long time since there's been any update to that. The negotiations in Congress have been largely stalled. The two main issues that they've been stalled over are state and local funding. The original bill, the first one that did pass at $150 billion for state and local governments. The Democratic proposal in this one had $900 billion, and Republicans said that's way too much. We just don't have enough money to do that. The other issue has been unemployment assistance. So the original bill had an additional $600 a week for people who were unemployed during the pandemic. As Senator Graham in particular went to great lengths to point out, for some people, not by no means all, but for some people who are making close to minimum wage, they would be making more in unemployment if they got that $600 than they were when they were employed. And he and several other Republicans were worried that would disincentivize people from going back to work. Do you see how that would be a concern? Where would you have liked to see some kind of, do you see any kind of middle ground here on those two?
Yeah, for the state and local funding, the biggest issue for me, what was left out of the CARES Act bill that we need in the next round is small local governments. So in the CARES Act, there was state funding, which South Carolina has received. There was also funding for large metropolitan areas, like big cities. but there was no funding, no help for our small counties and municipalities. And some of our municipalities are having trouble retaining employees. They can't afford them anymore. Our towns across this district are having trouble maintaining basic service programs that their citizens expect because they were completely left out of that bill. And so that's where I think we should have had focused on the second stage bill. As far as unemployment, I don't see any reason to pay people more than they made in their job. I'm great with that being a cap. But I do think we need to extend unemployment benefits for longer, because this is not something that's going to go away tomorrow. And from some of the recent numbers we're looking at, as much as a third of the jobs are going to be permanent losses. And so we have to have time for some of that recovery.
You mentioned term limits. You pledged to serve no more than 3 terms in Congress. That's only 6 years. As I mentioned, I'm pretty sure the average length, the time it takes to get a bill through Congress, is 7 years. Why would you limit yourself to that? And a broader question about term limits. It's often a fairly popular idea. A lot of voters like it, and a lot of candidates talk about it. But when you talk to political scientists, they are some of the folks who are most concerned about it, because they say that what you end up getting is a more inexperienced legislature, and the people who fill that gap, that void of institutional knowledge, are lobbyists who don't have term limits. They can stay around for however long they want. So I'm curious, how you respond to both of those two concerns.
Yeah, so the term limits pledge is really about, frankly, me and my family and what I want. I do not want to be in Congress for decades on end. That is not my dream. That is not the life I want. And I know how easily it could be to get sucked in. So I'm going into this with boundaries for me and my family. And those boundaries are I want to accomplish these things. And I could have picked 6 years or 8 years. It's almost arbitrary, but I want that limit, because this is about going in and achieving specific goals for me. And, our political system, the way money matters in our political system is not okay, the way money works. And I have been in this campaign for 1.5 years now. I've been raising money. We've outraised an 18-year incumbent 5 times running. So I have experience in that. And I knew very early I was not going to take any corporate money, because that was important to me, not to be beholden there. But when you're raising money in $50 chunks, that's a different ball game than when you have a guy that's getting 4-figure checks constantly from corporate PACs. And I see the lure for that in an office where you are elected every 2 years, where my campaign for re-election is going to start a couple weeks after I win this election. And as much as I want to spend 100% of my time doing nothing but the work of this office, I know that some part of my time is going to be spent on this re-election. And that is just not the life that I want for decades on end. So I've made this commitment. I felt like I should make it public to voters, because they should know what I'm in for. I'm not here to climb a leadership ladder in Congress or be beholden to anyone else. I'm here to do these things that are not getting done in the district, and then I'm going to go find my next job. Because one of the problems, I think, in our current system is we have politicians that do view it as a ring, as you said. It's a ring or a crown we're just going to wear for decades on end, and we're going to walk up that political ladder and have this political crown. But it's not. It's a job. It is a job. And you know what? I'm going to go on and have a different job. And that's the choice that I'm making in my life. And I think that's fair for voters to know where my loyalties lie and where my priorities are.
Let's go back to another viewer or reader question. What are the top 5 items that you wish to bring new legislation on, and what would that be? And 5 is a lot, so give us 3.
3. So we've already talked about 1. I won't rehash on prescription drugs. My top priority is rural broadband. And frankly, the work I want to do on that doesn't necessarily require legislation. It requires working with the USDA and the FCC. It requires, there's pockets of money there that are going everywhere else, but not to our district. And so we need to work with partnerships here on the ground to get communities grant ready. and work with, we've already had meetings with those federal agencies on the pathways to make that happen. Now, I do support I do support legislation around helping broadband, so I would be supportive on that. My other big issue here is, like I've mentioned before, infrastructure. We have to be forward thinking. And when we're just reactionary, that's when we frankly get screwed in pandemics and disasters. And if we're forward thinking, we've got some infrastructure issues in this district that have been ignored for decades. And so that's a place where I'm looking. Some of that may require just working with FEMA. Issues like the Columbia Canal here that was damaged in the 2015 flooding. We put a Band-Aid on it. Okay, Band-Aids don't last forever. We're gonna have another major weather event. We have to be ready for that. But it's also in legislation. You know, we had a fix for the Columbia Canal in a disaster relief bill. Wilson voted against it. So legislation, you know, I'm a pretty fiscally conservative moderate. I believe we need to have balanced budgets, especially in time of prosperity. But the one place where your federal tax dollars that you pay should be coming back in your district is some of these infrastructure issues that are literally not doable on on a county or town level. And so those types of bills are something I would be looking at.
Well, let me ask you, this just came in my head. Why are you voting for, and I'm assuming you are, why are you voting for Joe Biden, and why is Biden a better pick for the next 4 years than Donald Trump?
I'm not really I usually don't get into the presidential because I'm.
You got to. He's the head of the party. You explain to me why he's the better choice than Donald Trump.
I have a line of national security experts and other who say he's a better choice for our respect in the country and for our military. I think what we need most in our leadership is someone who is grounded and puts this country first. Do I agree with everything Joe Biden says? No, I don't. But we need someone who is not reactionarily tweeting. Again, this is about leadership and being calm and strategic and not being just reactionary to things.
If you're elected, your first vote will be for Speaker of the House. Presumably, there's been no indication, at least as of so far, that Speaker Pelosi would not seek to be reelected as Speaker of the House. Would you vote for her, or would you prefer Democrats to pursue other leadership at this point? This is, of course, if Democrats maintain control of the House.
Yeah, it's not necessarily my first choice, but look, when it comes to Speaker, my vote comes with a commitment that we're going to get things done in this district that I want. And so before I would commit my vote to Speaker to anyone, they have to give me that commitment that we are going to work to get the things done here that I care about. So that's kind of my litmus test, frankly.
So not necessarily wouldn't vote for her or anyone else. You'd have to talk to them first, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I would have to get some commitments from anyone, no matter who they were, on it. Yeah.
What would you say to bring younger people into the process? They're out there. It just doesn't hit me as an older district. I mean, as a younger district in the second. It seems like there's a lot of retirees, a lot of military folks. What would you say to get the younger generation in there involved and excited in your race?
Yeah, so we actually have more voters under 45 than over 65, which is not all that common. So we are a younger district as things go. And look, this is the time to step up. Congressman Wilson first took elected office when I was in preschool. I just turned 40. Okay, it's time for us to have some fresh and vibrant involvement in what's going on. And it's hard, I get it. Like, the reason I think younger people are not necessarily as involved is because you got kids and jobs and all this going on. I do too. I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. And when you're juggling after school activities and doctor's appointments and all these things, like, it's hard. But it matters for your kids. And what I found in this process, we've been looking hard for, a balance, because it's a lot of time, and the time I spend with my girls. but what they see is what is possible. And they see their mom working for a state and a country that will be better for them. And that's the big picture. And that's what we have to remember. We have to find time for the big picture to create the world we want our children to have.
Another decision you will have when you first get there is what committees you want to be on. It's actually before you even really get sworn in, that process kind of starts, and there's a lot of jockeying for position, particularly on the more popular committees. Have you thought about that at all, and where you would want to be and why?
Yeah, so my top choice is actually Veterans Affairs, and part of that has to do with how I found myself running. My brother's a veteran. He's been fighting with the VA for over a decade now. They've lost his paperwork 3 times. And this is a story I hear, frankly, a lot from people, many of whom called the congressman's office and never got a call back. And so I want to have a very robust constituent services program, especially for veterans as we interface with the VA. And being on that committee will give me a little more power in being a great advocate with Veterans Affairs. We also have the VA hospital here in Columbia in our district, and I've had multiple conversations with staff there. And I think that they have issues that we need an advocate on. They don't have enough PPE. They don't have the resources they need. I have doctors and nurses telling me things that they need, and they don't have someone advocating with VA to get it. And so that's a very important thing that I want to do in this role. And so that committee, I think, will help me be a better advocate in that area.
The path to voting by mail has been opened up this year by the State House and some other decisions. Do you support universal vote by mail? Is that something that needs to be just accepted from here on out? Or do you think this is just a unique situation and we should return to the older form pre-COVID?
So voting is our most fundamental right? It's our most fundamental right. So we have to be able to do it. So I do think that we should be allowed, that voters should be able to vote by mail. We have voters in precarious health situations that don't need exposure. So I do think we need it. I think it's, again, something we should look forward going forward. I think having options in how we vote is not bad. And for instance, when we talk about younger people voting, you talk about mom, someone was saying was like, I don't get what the big deal is. Like, you have smartphones, stand in line for an hour. What's the big deal about standing in line for an hour? Well, you know what I said? You've never stood in line with an 18-month-old, have you? Like, standing in line for an hour with a toddler is a whole different ball game. And I want that mom to be able, or that dad to be able to vote. And so having some options to make it where they can vote, I think is good.
What's the best advice you've gotten so far in launching this race from scratch to top?
Yeah, so 2 pieces of advice that I hold pretty close to me. One is remember that this is a job. So if being a congresswoman or being this political party, if it's part of who you are, part of your identity, there's nothing you won't do to keep your identity. But you know what happens if you lose a job? You get another job. And so that's just a reminder to me that that this is a job, and I am going to keep myself centered. I know my non-negotiables, and not kind of give it up for the win. The second piece is there are things you can control and things you can't. And that's been very helpful for me to focus on this. I can't control who's at the top of the ticket. And so there was a lot of noise in South Carolina around the presidential primary, but that's not where I put my energy. I put it on the things I could control. I could control how hard I work to get my message out. I could control how hard I work to fundraise so that more voters could hear our message. And so I've been able to really focus on the things that we can get done, and that's something I'm going to take into office with me. There should be things I can't control about Congress or the White House or whoever, but the things I can get done, I'm going to work my butt off for, and I will knock them out of the park.
All right, well, we're nearing the wrap up here. So there's 2 reminders I'd like to tell everyone here is that on the 7th of October, we're going to have our rescheduled Jamie Harrison Pints and Politics. So we'll look for that. And I believe we're going to be back in the Columbia area to do that. The site hasn't been picked, but we will get that out as soon as we know. And on next night on the 8th, we're going to be doing South Carolina's Charleston Congressman Democrat Joe Cunningham. That'll be down in the Charleston area. I'm not sure on the side of that too, but just stay tuned and we'll get the word out as soon as we can. So we're going to close up here with something that we always do, and this is our lightning round. So we're going to do this really quick. I do have to ask, though, I see you and your staffers are wearing POW on your shoes and POW on your mask. Is this kind of a Superwoman thing?
Yeah, so actually my campaign manager and political director are both women, and we bought these shoes together as we haven't sent a woman to Congress in 30 years in South Carolina. And I think that perspective of a mom matters. And one of the things someone told me early on in the campaign is like, yeah, if you want something done, get a mom to do it. And so there is a little bit of pride as a mom of two girls about women kind of, getting it done and kicking butt.
All right. We're in a pub here in a restaurant. Are you a beer drinker? And if so, what types do you favor?
Sour beers are my favorite. I honestly prefer wine to beer, but yeah, sour beers are my favorite of the beers.
What is the last book you read or read now? Your favorite?
My most recent book, I just finished the Outlander series. So I usually keep a nonfiction and a fiction book going because sometimes I gotta get away from it. And the Outlander series was the last series I read, and incredibly well written.
Who was your favorite president?
Truman. So I'm a Harry Truman scholar, and the Truman Foundation, what it stands for, and Harry Truman is it.
And before I forget, I'm going to just say thank you to the folks at Steel Hands for having us. We enjoyed this. You're very hospitable. And we're going to give Jamie the last question.
Last question is mustard-based or vinegar-based barbecue?
Ooh, that's a toughie. Probably vinegar. But yeah, I like them both.
Very good.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Post and Courier is extremely focused on journalism that makes a difference, that has an impact, and that not only is covering what is happening here in the State House, but is looking out for our readers and citizens of the state as lawmakers make decisions that influence their lives.